The day now is Saturday after the week's work, and they're on their way up to a wedding. There's been a funeral up there, and they meet people coming back on their way back from there. They get an early start in the morning, and they put their team away in the pasture at Prince's place. On the way up, they see birds sitting in the trees and diving for fish, and they see fish in the water, and they pass a place where the men are digging in another ditch. They talk of digging up old bones and about a road that washed away about where they used to race their horses on, the flats along the river. Incidentally, that road along Red River right now is the fifth road that's been there since these old-timers first lived along there. And right near Larder's place, near the Parkdale Road, there used to be an oak tree right where the middle of the river is now, and they tied their horses to that. And they drove their horses up and down on the bank where the mud was to race them in the early days. Now the river's wide there, and the banks are all falling in. Now, first they thought the wedding was going to be in another house till they got the message that it was going to be at their daughter's house, and they expected to have to be driven over, but to where it was. But because her husband is working, getting this ferry out of the river, and the daughter relieves them a little bit by telling them that she's going to have the wedding at her house. So the wedding takes place, and the groom is feeling very uncomfortable in a suit that one old wife, as they call them, was making it for him, and she stitched the sleeves in the wrong way. The right-hand sleeve was in the left-hand side, and there's a curve at the shoulder on a suit. So the sleeves were pointing backwards, and he stood like that all during the wedding with his hands pointing out backwards, and it made the women kind of snicker. After the wedding was over, he threw it off into the corner and stayed just with his shirt on later than that. The next day, it was Sunday, and it was Sunday, and they all went to church, and they talked about the grasshoppers being so thick at one time there, and about an old lady that had her two girls at school at church there, and the grasshoppers chewed their under things, and they all fell down to the floor when they got home after they stepped out of the cart. And after the wedding was over, and they all came home again these two came home again in their boat. They passed through a spot in the river where the people had put stones out from both sides to catch the sturgeon as they went through the middle. And they had to squeeze their boat through that to get back. And when they got back to Prince's place to pick up their oxen, the Prince was away to see a sick Indian because he was that man that was the Indian agent. He was a man amongst the Indians of some kind, that this man thought. And he was away, and so the wife, he was trying there to bring a cure to some woman that said that the curse was put on her by a Wendigo. That is a witch that can put a curse on an Indian or one of their enemies without even going near them. So that's the way they believed in one time in this country when the Indians were in their native state. Said goodbye to Prince's wife and took off for home in their cart, the Red River cart, but the wheels were creaking, and he feared that any moment it might collapse, and he said that he'd have to fix it, or else it would tip him out just the same way as one of his neighbor's wives did and broke her leg at one time. And then he came along James's place and thanked him for doing the chores up for him, and James, he told him of a couple that came by looking for a home, a place to live in a cart. And on his way home, he saw the wagon wheels that they'd made, but he didn't see the people. He figured he'd see them sometime later on. When he got home, his dog was there, and everything seemed to be in order. And that was the end of his trip up to the wedding and back. Now, these stories I've just put on tape, or have put on tape at least in the Bungee dialect, are fairly modified. There's sometimes some people around when they were speaking, you couldn't hardly tell what they were saying, unless you knew pretty well what they meant. And I've tried to make it so you can understand, listening to this, some of the things that I've tried to explain. But if I really did it, or if I could do it in the real dialect that they used, some of the phrases and words you wouldn't understand anyway, so I hope you get some enjoyment out of listening to these things. James dialect that they used, some of the phrases and words you wouldn't understand anyway, so I hope you get some enjoyment out of listening to these things. Time since me and the missus he take the boat ride, not like the people what lives close along the river. They're out in boats a lot of times. Some of them what fishes practically lives in their boats when the fishes are running good. My missus says the river can get pretty choppy in a big blow, and it gets dangersome when too many gets in a boat same time. Well, don't be afeard, I told her. Most of them people knows how to handle boats, and you'll not get drowned, I told her. Anyhow, I was thinking to take John's boat. It's the two of us. And we can turn a boat and stop and look on anything we're got a mind to then, I says. She quit saying anything more about going when I says that. And he started in getting our things ready after we'd done eating our breakfast. Most of it she had ready already. This way she wasn't long packing up after I put the cart at the door. Now I already see Dempsey about doing my chores for me when we're all set to go, but I took a turn along Dempsey's place to tell him one more thing special in particular. He was just crossing the road when we gets there on his way to see Donald MacDonald about boring his stone boat to haul away the banking from around his house. He told me all the people banks up their houses for the winter, keeps the floor warm for the babies to crawl around on without getting drafty like. I had to tell him not to let my brindle cow outside today. The mud got in her foot between her hoof like, and now she can't stand on one of her legs right. Well, take her some water into her in a bucket, I told him. After I told him that, we drove off and left him standing there. And he wished us luck on our trip. I heard that afore now about old Muscopenace's missus being sick now, indeed. But now Dempsey's been telling me she died. So most of the people will be away up at the stone church carrying out the burying, I suppose, when it gets to the settlement to pick up the boat. So after all, we might have to go it alone, and we'll be doing some rowing, I figure. We made the trip to Prince's place in a hurry, seems like, and he was at home, same as his missus. He was at home, too. They never get to see the funeral, because John's missus says she see what Muscopenace's missus, Kitchipy, they call her, when he laid her out. Seems years afore that, Kitchipy made her promise to dress her up in her dress with fringes at the bottom, with fine beaded work on it, the one she'd put away to lose when she was dead, along with a fine shawl she had that put away. She had that put away too, to put on her. Now, she says, I'm telling you this so as you'll know what to do. They'll let you know, she says, when my time comes. I don't want them burying me in no white shroud like they used on old Estaway's squaw and old Whitenails and Chisholm's missuses. I'm sure that wives won't like it when they get away there, dressed up like that, she says. So this is why Lizzie John put her in a box, just the way he wanted. And she done her job just the way she promised she would do it. And this is why she never get up to the stone church along with the rest of them, like. And by the looks of it, we never can make it soon enough to see the burying neither. Long John, he showed us where he keep his boat and helped us packing in our stuff. Then he said he'd show me where to put away my oxen in the small pasture he had. It's better to put them all by themselves after all. They might make strains, he was saying, with his animals like. So to save trouble, he'd better do that, he says. Well, I may be back again in a day's time, I says. With that, we all waved each other and pushed the boat out from the bank. Me, I took the first spell at rowing, and the missus grabbed up a paddle laying there, and she steered the boat from the back end. First one side and then the other side to keep the boat going straight like. That's how she learned how to do it in her father's boat when he'd take her along with him on the long trips. And out on the river and through the marsh, sometimes they had to pole along, and sometimes you had to help them pull the boat with a tump line across her forehead and carry everything around a rapid again, then drag the boat over stones or less they had to carry the boat around through the bush to get around the bad places. All this was when the river was low, not like now on this trip, she says. The water's highest now, she says. And that makes it easy traveling, except for the current, not like when the water's low. Then is when you have to work all those, she says. The water is calm in the river today, only a small little bit of current going this way. You always has some current to buck, 'cause the rivers always runs the other way, and we're not going that way, like this trip. I see two more boats, only one is in behind us, and one going north. He's followed along the opposite bank, although, and he can't hear us to find out why he's going that way. On the water is a crow duck trying to swallow a jackfish. He only gets it halfway down when he takes off and flies into a tree to finish his eating. That's why they call them crow ducks, 'cause they sit in trees, and they're black. One time I killed one of them crow ducks and was holding him by his legs, head down like, and out come a whole fish and a piece of one. It's crawling with maggots. They didn't seem to make him sick, mind you, but he sure could hold a load of fish in his neck. I wouldn't fancy eating a bird with them things crawling around in him, although. A piece farther on, fishing birds were diving off a tree head first in after small fish and catching them under the water, easy like. I watched one dive 3 times and never miss. His fish was flipping in his beak, side to side this way, just fairly shining in the sun. A pretty sight to see, although, is when we come opposite the fort up there on a high bank. On the east gate, there's red-coated soldiers standing stiff again, and people going up and down the bank carrying bundles all tied up, and barrels again. Lots of stuff I couldn't make out from where we was on the water, what it was like. All this was coming out of a row of York boats tied up. This must have been the brigade I was talking about afore, and I was thinking I made my trip too soon afore. Now there's lots of stuff to choose from. My missus said, wouldn't I like to look at all that stuff over? I guess you would, I says, but we're not got no time, and worst of all, we ain't got no money neither, nor stuff to trade even, I says. Well, then we may as well as get moving, my missus says. And she wanted to take a spell at rowing now, so I taked her up on that job with the paddle steering. And farther on, about a mile, I guess, there's some kind of a raft or something laying half on the bank with one end sticking in the water. So we ties up to that and we eat our lunch. And I see an Indian and scoop up the water in his brim of his hat right out of the river. That's the way they drink. But me, I made a fire in the lee of this raft, and I boiled a kettle with water we brung along with us in a jug. Near here I see a standing boy in a garden made with sticks and an old hat and a coat on to scare away the birds from there. They had it ready for when the garden stuff got dried, riped it up, I guess. After we got going, we meet boats coming towards us. The missus says, this must be the ones coming back from the burying, she says. Must be, I says. One of the boats comes across us, so I asked about that. And the people in the cross-us boat says they all see the old lady going to her last rest. She sure had lots of people known her, they told me. Well, she's been around for a long time, I says. She must have been close to 100, I says. We stopped a little and talking about a wedding coming up. So you're not stopping to the wedding then, I says. This is Long John's daughter with her man, Harry Cook. They live cross-side Red River, quite a piece to go yet. And they're not got nobody at home to chore up for them. So they're trying to make it home in time to get their work done afore darkness hits. It's not only them what's coming back, although, and we meet altogether 9 boats, I think it is, afore we pulled our boat up the bank, alongside 2 other boats with men in. They all had shovels, and they told me they was finishing up the day's digging in their ditch from up the bank that way down to the river. And they had to make cribbing under the rod to let water go under. The bank fall in at this place, they told me, and this is the 3rd road the water washed away, they told me. Old MacDonald, standing watching, says there used to be a big tree out in the middle where the water is now, to tie his horse to, mind you. And he could say he could throw a stone cross-side. Now the river is wide at that place, and nobody can't throw no stones cross-side no more. And the mud flats here are good for racing their horses on at low water. Everybody what has horses takes their horses and races up and down. Some of them are pretty fast, old MacDonald was saying. Because the father of all of them has racing blood in him. And this old captain, what fetched his horse from the old country, had him here for quite a spell, and lots of colts was born in these parts. And he brung them all the way in bots, except when he had to do some walking around the rapids. On the last leg of the journey, he was standing up in a York boat, and didn't he get excited in something and jumps over into the water and had to swim for it. He was just as good as ever when he dried out, they were saying. Where they're digging now, they told me they find bones and teeth buried in the mud 6 feet under. One fella was guessing it must have been an Indian camp here long ago. Now the mud washed over the bones every time the flooding come, long before any of us come here to dig up the bones. And after we stretched our legs a little and talked to the man what was digging, we took off again and never come ashore again till we come to our daughter's place where she lives. Nobody see us right away to help us carry our stuff up from the boat, but anyhow, we never taked it all up. So one of her boys see us, so after we said good day, he made a run down and fetch up what we left in there. And after we come to the house, Victoria threw her arms around me and Mama, and said she was glad to see us then, she says. And the kids, they says, hello too. 4 of them she's got, counting the one down at the boat. One of them, that's the last one I think it is, she's a girl, not very old yet, but 4 years I think, with long hair she's got. Victoria shows us where we've been sleeping, and the kids can sleep downstairs this time, she says. We're not got a lot of time before the wedding starts, so she says to sit in and eat jam and thick cream, along with homemade bread. Why, that's good bread, like my daughter Victoria knows how to make it. And for drinking, she keeps these bees, they call it, working up and down in a stone crock. And after it's ready, that bees mixture makes a good drinking. So this time I'm up here, I'm figuring on taking some of that bees home with me to start our own brewing in a stone crock, same as my daughter Victoria does. My son-in-law, Nistow, comes in now, so with sick hands, and then he says he got late because he had to pull the ferry to fix a leak what sprung up. And his team is tired from going around and around this way, winding up the rope on the capstan to pull the ferry up the bank. After he fixed the leak, he had to roll the ferry back down the bank into the river again, and it's pretty easy to skid it back down on round sticks, he said, put under it. A lot easier than pulling it out. After that, he says his team is tired. He says he can't drive us over. Well, you can forget about that, Victoria says, because I just had a message to see if we could let them have the wedding over here in our house, since this is where they'll be dancing. So I sent word back to make them welcome. They all have to bring over the eats anyhow, so we all can take more time to make ourselves ready. I'll put the kids to washing up and get them changed to look their Sunday best. Now, one of the boys' pants was tight, and she had such a work getting them on him. They only come just under his knees, whatever. So they bent same as a stovepipe knee. Maybe that's why they calls them kind of stovepipe pants. I don't know about that. Me and Nistow come to the house from doing his chores. Quite a few people was there already. The old ones. At sweats and weddings, people brings all their kids along. They can get into more trouble you can shake a stick at, making such a racket, chasing each other up and down the stair. Well, but what you gonna do? You can't leave them home all alone that way, by themselves. Then, too, some of them get to be pretty good step dancers from watching and starting in young that way. Now, Miller's room was big, all right enough. When two sets get swinging, but it gets pretty wild. So back where I just come from, they were hoeing her down in a small little log block, and this old Estaway, that's the one I said about they put his wife in a shroud, was sleeping in the corner, and didn't old Wheeler swing Jemima so hard, she landed right on top of him. Old Estaway sleeping in the corner. We was all sitting along the wall, and old Lexi was tuning up his fiddle, ready for fiddling in the bride, when she come in with her man to get joined up together like. Well, it'll not be long now till they come in, somebody says. So we all of us sat watching. At last they come in and standed at the other side, cross-side from all of us. Along comes the preacher with his hat still on. He never took it off when he was hitching them up together, neither. Everybody standing up and watched to see how he done his job. And each one of them had on new-looking clothes, and the bride's dress was long down to the ground even. And what kind of a shoes she had on, I couldn't see proper, for everybody noticed her man standing there, although the woman was whispering around about him. And it seems one old wife, she stitched him a new suit in a hurry like, and didn't he stitch in the sleeves wrong sides, kind of backwards like, and he had no time to change them again, and when he found it out. So here he is standing there with his arms kind of bent behind him, sticking out the wrong way. Well, he went through it all, standing like that, until it was all over. And you know, people had a time to keep their faces straight when the preacher says, she's his'n and he's hern. Then he flings his jacket in the corner and spent his time shirt-sleeved like, till the dance was all over, and he'd take his woman home with him. Well, as I was saying, they got married up, and all of us got to kiss the bride after all, and I was lucky. I got 2 kisses before she got past me. Now my daughter Victoria says, clear the floor and get your partners for a reel. That's the first one they started off with, to get them all warmed up like. And later on, there was 2 sets of squares, just fairly shaking the house, and this rabbit dance, and drops of brandy, keeping everybody busy taking turns. 2 steps, sauteases, and this kind were a little slower, although, and nobody hooped her up with them kind very hard. Then all the people eat lunch, and the kids were told to go to bed, because after all, Victoria, she put the bunch of them, that was getting sleepy, she put them upstairs like, but they never went to sleep right away although. They had a row of faces peeking down at the top end of the stairs, giggling and watching what was going on, till nigh on the time everybody went home. Then all at once, like, there's a scuffle going on up there, and one of them calls for a rag. "What's the matter up there with you kids?" Victoria calls up. Then the rest of them says, "That dashed girl Sutherland, she blooded little Willie's nose for him." "Oh ho," Victoria says, "so that's it, is it? If you don't keep quiet up there, I'll come and give you little darts a good tanning." And that settled it. We never heard no more out of them until nigh on the time everybody went home. They were just finishing up this rabbit dance, you call it. And at the end, somebody says, "Well, how about finishing up now with a Red River zig?" So all makes a kind of a zigging match out of it and started stepping. Some of them could step real fancy, like one woman there. She was a heavy one, but for stepping, although nobody could beat her. She come away with the prize. Okay. One old fella, I thought he was going to pass out. He was puffing that hard. These old ones, but they're bound to try it when they hear that fiddle music starting up. That jig is the best dance what I like to hear. It's only the right kind of a tune for this kind of a stepping. And different ones what's been away from these parts says they never heard it no place else but around here. Now, not much liquor was served out around in this wedding. Only two fellas had some in them. Some weddings I've been at, although, some of them were lit up enough to make them dangersome. And I found out you can't argufy with none of them when they're all liquored up. Let them sleep it off to home, I say. Now, all the presents what people gives to newlyweds, they piled it into their cart and took off to their new house the man had ready for her. All the stuff what people gives new married ones like that starts them up like. They can get more stuff to fill their houses up with after. Most of it is all homemade anyhow. Everybody left now, so me and Nishta were curtained off a corner in the front room and slept on the floor. And the missus and my daughter went up and slept with the kids upstairs after they cleaned up, of course. That's after the last ones went home, like, when the daylight come. It happened this way in the morning. It come Sunday. So me and the missus with Nishta and the kids, we all walked up to church after we all helped Nishta and Victoria chewing up and cleaning pots and one stuff or another. Everybody usually walks to church. In there, some has buffalo hides tacked on to their kneeling boards, and in their own places, too, to kneel on for praying. Nishta had them in his seat for his family, but me and the missus, we kneel on the bare boards with no skin tacked on, 'cause this church ain't what you would call our own church we go to, you might as well say. And this church is a fine big church made with stone, with thick walls it's got, with bells hanging up in the tower up there. They took the stone out of the river, but the bells, they come here on a ship from Scotland, I hear tell. Some of them say they made it too big, although, but me, I heard every word what the preacher had to say in there. I heard different ones say, when the old fella building it with the preacher, he take a look at the size of it. When they had it finished, he says to the preacher, "Cochran, sir," he says, "you made it too big. They'll never hear you." "All right, then," the preacher says, You go at the door and me, I'll go up front and see if you can hear me, what I say. So they both takes their places, and the preacher says, Duncan, he says, drink no more whiskey. Ah, Duncan says, that's enough. They say you can hear a pin drop in there even. This old preacher's job was to save people for the Lord, and he made a mighty good job of building a place to save them in, but on our way walking back now was a sunny day, and Victoria's kids had fun running all over picking these crocuses and other kind of things growing up on our way home. While the woman was making dinner, Nistow showed me around this place. He had a field of wheat in already on a high spot. That's what he put in first, like. And the rest, his land was still wet from the spring. He says he figures that this year there are going to be grasshoppers to eat his crop up. So maybe he'll have to cut it down before it's ready and use it for feed if they get too sick like. And the old people around can remember afore when the hoppers cleaned them out. Nobody don't want that to happen again, Bungee says. So I told him what I heard old Granny McCrae said about what happened with hoppers once. It was in this same church we just come from, so it was. On the way there, she says, the cart was slipping around on pure grasshoppers. The ruts was full up to the top and spread all over the sides. And in there she was sitting with her two girls, and they was trying to keep still like. But one girl was shifting around a lot, fidgeting. Anyhow, when she gets home now, she starts taking off her top blouse, and her petticoat and all that falls to the floor like by themselves. The old lady said it's a good thing they had a cart to go home in, or they would have fallen out on the road. Seems like the hoppers chawed their bands away, and nothing couldn't stay up no more. And this is why kids was restless in church, I suppose. They're not going to be that thick up our way, I told them, so we can help him out next winter if it turns out he doesn't get a crop. That he thanked me and said he'd let me know how things went off. And after dinner it come time for us to make for home now. So the kids helped us load up our bot again, and Victoria sent a bunch of rhubarb for the missus to plant it. She got this rhubarb from her neighbor and nursed it along for 3 years now, and she had enough to spare a root. So this is why she gives us some. The small one, little Minnabel, wanted to come along with us when she heard about the time we keep our other little Nusashin, little Mary. And the missus says for them all to row up and stay overnight sometime. And Victoria, she made a promise she would do that. And little Minnabel, she stopped crying all at once. For in our boat, the second-sized girl fall into the water at the edge and mess up her Sunday dress. She never seemed to mind being wet, although, because all the kids up and down learns how to swim in the river. Up at the fort, when I was up there, I was talking to a crippled fellow, Colin, something or other his name was, and he says his brother Jock, he swim across the river to the opposite side and back again just for the fun of it. Well, we always back and forth now till we was quite a piece downstream. And then I took my spell at rowing. I never had to pull hard, although, because the current was helping us along, and in no time at all, it seemed, we'd come up to the rapids. And at this place we noticed different ones had stones piled in a kind of a fence again, out in the water for both sides. And all this since yesterday when we come by. And we wondered how a boat can get through there. And out in the middle there's these two boys calls to us to come over there. So it turns a little and comes along their boat. In their boat they had it full up with fish, and this is why they were stopping there. Every time a fish comes on through this gate, they had fixed, they could gaff 'em on a spear. And a bunch, what they had was sturgeon. So they give us a couple of small ones to take home. Not big ones like the one I heard about the haymaker speared. And they give us a catfish too. They had a bunch of morays too, and they told me they could only eat the livers from them kind. There was a big liver, they say, and the green slimy things without any scales that don't look good to me, so I never take none of them. Now, this big sturgeon I was talking about come up Almonds Creek, they call it, what runs into another river south that way that runs into this river we're traveling on. Up past the forks it was. They say some people was making hay and one of them see it come and get the others, and 2 or 3 sticks their hay forks into 'em and hanged on to hold 'em down, and while someone bring the rope to snare 'em. It took a team, quite a pull, they were saying, to get 'em out of the water, and when they stringed 'em up on a tree, he measured taller than any of them standing around like. The biggest sturgeon anybody ever see in these parts, they were saying. Anyhow, we thanked them for keep going till we come to Prince's place to take his boat back home, you'll see. And the missus, he took her last spell at rowing, and she done good at it. Only the one there when we come was Prince's missus. All alone she was. She told her sir man was over to see a sick Indian, what some other Indians put a curse on. And some of them claim they can do that without going near anybody. They want to spell that way, even. They call that wash away paumawa, or something like that. There was a name for that curse. And to try and break the spell, that wife he had was chanting over him, rocking back and forth, moaning away to chase away the devils that was bothering him. And if she'd keep it up long enough, maybe he would get better again. And this is why Prince was watching her doing that. And his missus told us. And if her magic worked, he said, he would be back home soon. But we couldn't wait for that, although, because it was getting late already. So we hitched up our oxen and took our leave of Prince's missus and told her to tell him thanks for his boat, what we used. And the cart we had to come home on had low spokes on one wheel from getting dried out, I suppose. And the creaking was getting worse coming along. And I was feared lest it break down before we made it back home. Now this put me in mind of my neighbor, what had a cart like mine. So he loads on a barrel full of milk without no lid on proper into his cart, and sends his missus over to another neighbor to sell his milk. She drove the wheel into a big stone laying there, and down the wheel goes, breaking the spokes. And his missus fell off, and she break her leg. And she lays there moaning away, she said, till somebody pick her up and fetch her home. What's this? Her man says, when they arrived home now. And she told him about her leg, it was broke. So he says to her, never mind your leg, did you spill all my milk? After thinking about that for a spell, I had to fix my wheel, lest I'd be picking my missus up some of these days. My deceased father used to tell about hearing the wheel squealing and creaking and making such a dashed racket fit to split your ears for you. This was when the whole string of carts was coming in loaded up with buffalo hides and dried meat after a big hunt away west in the prairies. And for the racket they made, you could hear it for miles, he says. And when you got to sleep, you still could hear it ringing in your head, he says. Now, when we come to James's place now, he was just coming back from doing up our chores. He says to us, "So you get back then?" I says. He says, "I expected you to get a ducking, the two of you. I see you come back dry, although, so you never forget to handle a boat yet then." "And how did you make out?" I says to him. "Oh, fine," he says, "'ceptin' your dog took off, and he never come back yet." "Oh," I says, "he'll come back," I says, "after he's done running. He done that afore, never mind." His missus was setting plucking in a chicken, what she killed, and she says it was a rooster, and she killed him 'cause he got on top of her little girl's head and peck her, fit to make her cry. Anyhow, this one keep crowing after daylight come even, and wake her all up, so she cut his head off for him, so he never can crow no more. "And he looks kind of skinny to me," I says. "Well, he'll make soup anyhow, but," he says, "that wife's handy with her fingers, slick enough to make willow baskets, all sizes. They wanted them up at the fort, they was so good made. She never had much time to do much of it, although she was that busy. Dempsey says some new people come along looking for a place to make a house on while we were away. So after we thanked him for doing our chores for us, we hit for home. But we never see no new people, although only the tracks what they made out of our way. Well, if they are around here, I told the missus, we may run into them sometime, I says. At home now, everything was just like we left it. So the missus take in the stuff, and me, I had to look at my brindle cow to see her sore foot again, now indeed. She was standing on it by now, and anyhow, but I tied on a wet rag with a few drops of Indian medicine on it to help it along to get better. This old squaw, she give it to me once. She made it out of roots she picked up. It keeps the poison out, she says, so I tried it. And back in the house, I smelled right away what the missus was already warming up for bed lunch. And if we can't sleep good after even, she says, it's a long spell since we eat enough. So we both are taking a chance on not sleeping good, eating heavy like. After we eat, but I got the feeling drowsy, same as usual. And I hied me up to bed, thinking all the time about getting to work on my field like. The missus said afore we left to make our trip we made. Although I left the lamp a-burning even, I slept so sound I never heard the missus come up the stair. But in the morning, when I wakes up, he was there all right, in his place, laying right beside me.